so much for having me. I really appreciate the introduction. And I really loved what the Reverend was saying because he touched upon the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And that's the reason I went to law school. So I really wanted to be a human rights lawyer. And unfortunately, I feel like when you go to law school and you start going into the UN and seeing what's happening, you realize that a lot of things are just words on paper. Not much is happening. And I always like to say people have human rights if they live in the Western world. Human rights is not really a thing that exists outside, unfortunately. So we have ways to go. And I feel like the other issue with human rights is that whenever we want to do something about it, the path is nearly impossible, right? You want to be an activist, but unless you come from a rich family, you can't afford it because you have to eat. You need a roof over your head. And so quickly I realized when I was only 18, because I went to law school when I was 18, that it's impossible for me to afford to be a human rights advocate. I don't come from a rich family. And so that is something we need to work on, right? We need to make it affordable for people who want to make a difference to make a difference. It shouldn't be you have to sacrifice your human rights to help others get human rights. And so that's something that I think is an issue. And now I work in tech, which is super exciting. And my transition to tech came kind of from my frustration with academia, because even with academia, it's this idealistic scenario of you're going to come and change the world. And then once you're in there, there are all these structures and politics, and you're not allowed to say what you're really thinking. And you can't really have opinions that differ from people above you. And so it's just, there's so many issues, right? And I'm hoping that I can help change some of the negative behaviors we have in this world by just speaking up. But I think in speaking up, I'm privileged. I'm privileged because I'm a Canadian citizen. I'm privileged because I'm educated. I'm privileged because I have savings. I'm privileged because I'm married and I have a husband who can financially afford me if I ever get fired from a job for speaking up. And so that privilege allows me to speak up. And so many people don't have the privilege to say anything, to do anything. And so what I wanted to do today is kind of talk about the ways in which a person who doesn't come from a privileged background, whether that's because they're an immigrant or a person of color or a woman, can start to speak up without feeling like they're putting their livelihood at risk. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is your passport, right? So I'm sure we have people listening on here who are living in countries where they're not a citizen yet. That should be your number one goal. Become a citizen of the country you live in, because that gives you power. So make sure you're a citizen, because I know for a fact that there's so many people from Iran who live in Europe, who live in America, who don't speak up when they see something wrong because they know if they speak up, they might be fired, which means they're deported, which means they have to leave. And that's a scary thought. On top of not speaking up, they're more likely to be abused. I saw it with my own eyes where my friends who only had the Iranian passport and not the Canadian passport like I had were not given holidays. They weren't given bonuses, and they were expected to be quiet and accept it because you're lucky to be here. And I think that is a very, very, very toxic environment that we need to be aware of for immigrants in whatever country they're in, whether that's Canada, US, or Europe. I've seen it everywhere. Now, the second thing we need to focus on is documenting when things are happening that are not okay. So if you see someone bullying, document. If you see someone sexually harassing someone else, document. If you see someone not doing their job properly, document. If you see someone who says one thing in front of the news, you know, a CEO that likes to act like he cares, but then in private he doesn't, document. Document everything, but don't let anyone know you're documenting. And then slowly start to look for allies. Be sneaky. Look for people in the company or the organization you're in academia or in business, who are going to have your back, who are stronger than you. Maybe they're the dean. Maybe they're the COO. Maybe they're an investor. Maybe they're from a bigger company who controls your company. Find that ally and take your time. Make sure they're on your page. Make sure they see the evidence. Don't just go ahead and speak up. No. Make sure people have your back. And know the consequence of us speaking up, because you might lose your job, and that's okay. There are a million other jobs out there. But know that that's a risk, and only speak up when you're 100% aware of the risk. Because I've seen so many people get fired, and they didn't think they're going to get fired. And I feel like sometimes And it sucks to say this, the consequences are too severe. It's not worth it to say anything. And that's the reality. We shouldn't live in this world where we think we can just speak up and it's going to be okay, because sometimes it's not okay. And sometimes you need to keep your mouth quiet. And that's just the state we're in. Are we going to be in this state in 10 years, 20 years? Hopefully not. But right now, sometimes you shouldn't speak up. So that's something that I think people aren't told enough. Sometimes you should just ignore it and switch companies. Just walk away from it as fast as possible, but don't say anything. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about is your due diligence, right? I feel like I went into law school not doing my due diligence, not realizing how horrible the life of a human rights lawyer is. I didn't do my due diligence when I did my PhD because I thought academia is great. I drank the Kool-Aid every time. And now I'm in tech, but I did my due diligence. I knew that sometimes tech sucks. Sometimes you have a horrible boss. Sometimes you might work for a company that's not ethical. So while I was interviewing for positions within tech, I was so selective. I didn't care if I'm turning down jobs. I didn't care if I was unemployed for an extra month, because I made sure I have enough savings to afford myself my due diligence, because I wasn't about to take any job, because I wasn't about to read my mistakes. But I think these are kind of life skills no one really teaches us. We're told to be good, we're told to do good, but no one tells us how, and no one tells us how to be good without losing everything. And so that's, I think, should be part of our education for younger people. Hey, you should have morals, you should have ethics, but know how to actually take action based on your morals and ethics. No one told me how. I'm learning by trial. And so that's one of my missions, and I hope conversations like this can guide people. And I love when people say everybody has the right to be happy, everybody has the right to have a good life. I agree, but the reality is that's not the case right now. So we need to work together to get there eventually, maybe in 100 years. But I don't think we're there yet, and I feel like a lot of people pretend to care when they actually don't do anything about it. But that's just my 2 cents. Thanks.